Welcome, everyone. You are attending the How to Fund Your Webinar, your Simon Degree webinar. And my name is Stephanie Attridge. I'm the Director of Admissions Analytics, as well as the Simon Financial Aid Liaison. And I'm joined by my colleague, and I'll have her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trista Kukuchka. I'm Director of MS Admissions. So excited to be here today.
Thanks, Trista. Trista will join us toward the end to help me handle Q&A. So thanks, Trista. All right, so the agenda that we have for you today is first, we're going to go over how to prepare to make an educational investment and the things that you need to consider. We're then going to talk about determining educational costs, funding options and opportunities for your graduate degree program, next steps, and then we'll hit the Q&A. And I know that some folks had some pre-submitted questions. We'll also have live questions. Please do hold your questions until the end. We're going to be utilizing the Q&A feature. And I don't love people asking questions at the beginning because very well often we are going to be addressing your questions during the presentation. And so please do hold your questions until the end. Okay, so things to note for this webinar that this presentation does apply to both full-time MBA and full-time MS programs, domestic and international students. So most things will apply to everyone. If something applies to only one group of students, I will highlight that and say that specifically. We will talk first generally about financial aid concepts and terminology that you need to know, things to consider. And then I'll specifically talk about Simon and how we handle our financial aid at the school. Okay. So things to keep in mind, and I have been doing this over 20 years at Simon. I want everyone to understand that you can afford a Simon degree, okay? So if this is something that you want to do, you want to come to the United States and get a great business graduate school degree and get a job. A lot of our programs are STEM, and so you could stay in the US with a STEM position for up to 3 years. Everyone can do it. However, it will require a combination of things and different funding options. So this could be scholarships, yes, personal savings, family funds, and also educational loans. Okay, so it's typically a combination of things. It's not going to be, I want to be realistic for everyone, that not everyone is going to get 100% scholarship and going to get living expenses taken care of, and you don't have to put any sort of personal investment into your education. I don't think that it is realistic, at least here in the United States, and certainly not at Simon. And so that's why I do these webinars, so you can kind of understand the various different options that you have to make this work for you. A lot of times there is money that is going to have to come from yourself, whether it be savings or loans, which we will talk about in a moment, okay? I do like to always mention that there's an excellent return on investment in business degrees. The cost of living in Rochester, so there are two pieces, which we'll talk about soon, which are your direct costs and your indirect costs. Your indirect costs are your living expenses. And selecting a city anywhere in the world is important when you're going to be a full-time student because you don't have a lot of extra money to spend on your living expenses. And so we are very fortunate to be in the city of Rochester here within New York State. That is a middle-sized city. It is not too big like some of the bigger cities in the US that are expensive, nor is it too small that there's not a lot of opportunity for things to do while you're here. And so when I'm talking with students, that's definitely something you need to consider. Our post-degree outcomes are also excellent. I have the MS career outcomes here, an average of the last 3 years, because I think that is important to see across all 4 different programs. And so we have different either placement statistics, how many students, percentages of graduates received a job within 6 months of graduation, or salary amounts, what you can expect to receive salary-wise after you graduate. And so it's just a combination there. And then for MBA students for a full-time class of 2023, you can see those statistics as well. And so I bring this up because this goes into play. So you might be putting in some investment here, of course, spending your own personal savings, family savings, taking out loans to get this the degree. But what do you get on the back end? How are you going to repay your family if you have to, or these loans? And so that's certainly something that you need to consider as well. And so we have fantastic outcomes that should be part of this decision that you're making. Okay. So the first thing I like to do, especially now when it's September and it's early on, you have almost a full year to plan for spending your or saving for your degree, rather, is to learn where your money goes each month. And so right now, for those of you who are working, you are spending sometimes saving money for business school. Hopefully, if you haven't already, you're going to start after this presentation. If you're going to school, it's also important to maintain kind of realistic spending right now as a student so that you're saving some money and not spending too much right now, so you're saving for graduate school. So you want to track your expenses for some time. So from now for the next 6 to 9 months. You want to identify discretionary, so things that you don't need to spend your money on: going out to eat, doing happy hours with friends, buying that coffee every morning out, or lunches out. That's a great way to save some money. Start bringing lunch from home and also having dinners at home and bringing your coffee to work with you every day or to school. I challenge you to only make non-discretionary expenses for the next upcoming months. So this would be what you pay for rent, what you pay for food, things that you have to spend money on versus things you don't. And any of that extra money that you're saving now, because you're not making these non-discretionary purchases, or discretionary purchases rather, put that money into your school savings account so you have some money when you start school. You can use a budget worksheet. There's some fancy ones out there, MS Money, Quicken, Mint, which is free. I typically just use just good old Excel, and that's how I create my budget. For those students that are on the call, or prospective students that are located in the US, you can check your credit score. That's really important to do to make sure that you can have a good credit score so that you can take out educational loans. You can do this free by going to annualcreditreport.com. You also want to, of course, pay your bills on time. That's very important. And then not have any extra loans that you have. So reduce or eliminate your consumer debt. So this would be anything on credit cards. If you have a car loan, trying to pay that off as well, or selling your car if you don't necessarily need it when you come to Rochester, because that would be a savings that you can have. Okay, so now you're looking at graduate schools. You want to make a list of the schools that you're considering. And so you can, you should be determining your educational costs and what are the different schools that you're considering? What are their tuition? What are any fees that are in addition to tuition that the school or the university charges? You want to add that all to your spreadsheet. And then it's important, like I mentioned before, how much does that city cost to live? So what are your living expenses going to be? Typically, budgets for different programs are on their website, on their external website. So you can do some research, get that into an Excel spreadsheet, and so you can compare. You want to talk to current students. That's also a great way to say, you know, what did you learn? What was surprising about the city that you moved to for school? What are the things that I should be considering? How can I save money? Typically, budgets are created per academic year. And so we currently have our 24-25 budget, but we will be coming up with our 25-26 budget in the next few months when our Board of Trustees determines our tuition fees for the next year. Simon academic expenses can be found on our website using these QR codes. Okay, so some terminology that I think would be helpful for you to understand, both for your budgetary purposes, but also if you're considering taking out loans, is this concept of cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is made up of two different types of expenses. your direct expenses, which are your tuition and fees. This is what you are charged by the university on your student bill. So this is what you directly owe to attend that school. The second type of expense is your indirect expenses. As graduate students, you're not living on campus like you might have when you were undergrad. And so your room and board was charged automatically to your student account. Your indirect expenses are what you pay out to by yourself. You pay your landlord for food or for your rent. You pay for your food at the grocery store. And so these are your extra expenses. All of these things together are taken into account for the cost of attendance. The indirect expenses do include room and board, books, personal expenses, such as like your going out money, clothing allowance, that sort of thing. Transportation, that is transportation within Rochester. So it does not take into account you traveling from home country or wherever you are in the United States to Rochester. That does have to be on your own dime. So this is, again, something you need to think about and start planning now, because you will have to pay for that. No matter where you're getting your money from for your degree, this is extra because you have to get here to Rochester for our full-time program, which is in person. And then you also have to take out health insurance here in the United States. And so we have a university plan that you would be billed for in your indirect expenses. So all of this is your published cost of attendance, and this is what you can qualify for loan funding. And I'll talk about that soon. Cost of attendance does not include, however, luxury living. And so you have a set amount that the financial aid office will come up with for your rent. So how much normally should a graduate student at the University of Rochester be spending for rent? Right now, it's $1,134 US a month. That is how much financial aid is setting the rent for. So if you rent an apartment for $1,500 a month, that's an extra $400 that is not part of your budget. And so you can't borrow loan money for that. And so that would be coming out of your personal savings or your family money as well. It would not be able to come out for loans. Credit card payments are not included in cost of attendance. So that would be money that you would have to account for on your own. And a big thing within Simon Business School, you'll be traveling for conferences and job interviews. And that is something different in graduate school that is not normal. And so that's above and beyond your cost of attendance. And so you also have to consider how to pay for that as well outside of loan funding. So that will come from personal or family funding as well. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about funding options and opportunities. And so I get this question a lot. Are there other scholarships out there other than what Simon may provide? And the answer is yes. There are private and outside scholarships to be had for students. And each one typically has its own application process and criteria that they're looking for. So this does involve some research on your part to find these opportunities. It's not something that the school will help you with. Many of these opportunities do stipulate that you need to be a U.S. citizen or a U.S. permanent resident. There's application deadlines typically a few months before you enroll. You actually, a lot of times, don't need to be already admitted to a program in order to apply. If you do win that scholarship, then you just have to show with a mission letter to a business school that you are going to, and then that you would qualify. So you can start looking now at these opportunities, and I've included two resources for you, FastWeb and Petersons.com, that are free resources for you. So now talking a little bit more about the Simon school-specific opportunities that you have. So like many business schools, we do have merit-based scholarship. So I want to very much stress that these are not need-based scholarships. It's merit-based. And so I'll talk a little bit about the criteria that we use later on in the presentation. But this is basically how you merit, how do you compare to other school students that have been admitted to the program? So everyone is eligible to be considered. It does not luckily have a separate application process like those private scholarships. The Simon application for admission is your application for a merit-based scholarship. We have literally one question on our application to be considered, and it's, would you like to be considered for Simon's merit-based scholarship? If you want to, you say yes. If you don't want to, you say no. There is no impact on your admission decision if you say yes. So sometimes it's a rumor out there that if you say yes, you'll have less chance to be considered for scholarship. That is not true, at least here at Simon. Excuse me. If you apply, the admissions committee first considers you for admission. And then if you have been admitted, we then look at that question. And if you ask to be considered for scholarship, we would then consider you for scholarship. They are offered, our scholarships are offered at the time of admission. So you'll know that you've been admitted. And then at the time of admission, you'll also know how much scholarship you get. So you don't have to wait to learn that. Our scholarships are competitive. Because they're merit-based, we do not always give them to everyone. And the amount that we give varies. And so I show you here, it's in increments of 5%. So they do go from 5% all the way up to 100%. So a lot of students kind of hone in on that 100% and they're like, oh, there's full scholarships to be had. And that is true. We have some full scholarships, but not everyone gets a full scholarship. And if you do have it's very hard to get a full scholarship. Okay, so that is not something that you should be counting on when you're applying to business school. Okay, and so you need to kind of go into this and you need to say, okay, can I apply to Simon? Can I afford to go there? And do not count on 100% award, because those are not very common. It's much more common to get a partial award than it is to get a full tuition scholarship. Again, there's no need-based scholarships, and we're going to talk about the criteria later in the presentation. Excuse me. Another question we get a lot, and we got actually in the pre-submitted questions as well, are, do we have graduate assistantships? And I know in this kind of varies across schools, that there's these graduate assistantships that kind of pay for everything. Or if you get scholarship, you can get a graduate assistantship, and then again, we'll pay for everything and you don't have to pay for anything to go to business school. That is not how it works here. The graduate assistantships typically are like on-campus jobs. And so that helps you pay for some of your discretionary purchases, so kind of like your living expenses. But it very rarely will they pay for everything. So they do require some level of work or service. They could be like a job here in admissions or at the Bennett Career Management Center. You could work at Starbucks on campus. We have had some students be assistant coaches for some of our athletic teams. We do have resident assistants as well. So there are many different kinds of opportunities, but there's not an unlimited amount of opportunities. And so not everyone will get a graduate assistantship, even if they apply for one. You can explore what is out there by going to rochester.edu. You search student employment and you go to the student employment office homepage. A lot of times they don't open this up until you are an enrolled student, meaning you've accepted our offer of admission. And so that's why I always say a lot of times more information for Simon positions don't start until you have enrolled, so until next fall. All right, so now shifting to educational loans. And so these are really important for so many of our students. They do need an educational loan. They do not have enough in savings or family funds to pay for their graduate business school, so they have to consider an educational loan. U.S. citizens and permanent residents have our federal loans. The first is the federal direct unsubsidized loan. This is where you fill out the FAFSA and you get up to $20,500 per academic term. If you need more than that, which many of my domestic students do need more, there is the second federal loan, which is called the Grad Plus loan, that is available up to your full cost of attendance. And so again, domestic students, If you don't have enough in savings and you don't get, a full tuition scholarship like many of our students, and even if you get a full tuition scholarship, you still have your living expenses that you have to think about. And so you do typically need an educational loan. This will cover everything to allow you to come to business school. And so the Grad Plus loan, I do like to mention that is based on a credit check. And if you don't pass the credit check, which is why I spent some time at the beginning of the presentation, making sure that you have a good credit score, you might need to get a cosigner. If you still don't qualify for the Grad Plus loan, you could then move to private loans, and those could be available for you. Once your funding disperses, it would pay off your tuition and fees, your bill within the bursar at the university, and then anything extra would be refunded to you via direct deposit so that you could pay your living expenses for that semester. So moving on to international students, I know many of my international students need loans as well. They don't have enough in savings, nor do they have the family support to be able to pay for everything. And so they have to consider educational loans as well. For my full-time MBA students, so full-time MBA students only, Simon does co-sign a loan with College Ave for you that will cover tuition minus your scholarship, plus your direct fees. We do not have that option for full-time MS students. So full-time MS students or full-time MBA that don't want to consider that College Ave loan, you could have, if you have a US citizen or permanent resident, that would be a cosigner for you. There are private loans here within the US that you could consider. A lot of my students, especially in India and in China, do take out educational loans through their home country. Their different banks and or their government, the Chinese government, will give educational loans out. So those are fantastic opportunities for them. There's also loans through US banks that you can get without a cosigner as an international student. You would want to research any of those on elmselect.com. You want to, for the school search, type in University of Rochester, and then for select your program, type in international or select international, and that would bring up all the loans that are available to you. Similar to the graduate or the domestic loans, anything that comes in from a bank will come into your account at the bursar office and would pay off your tuition and fees, and then anything extra that you got for living expenses would be refunded to you to your bank account to use for that semester. Other sources that I've mentioned kind of along the way, of course, personal savings that hopefully you'll accrue over the next year while you're saving for business school. You might be lucky enough to have family support. It may not cover everything, so you might have to do a combination of things. You might have a working spouse that can kind of pay for your living expenses while you're going to school, and that's wonderful. For any military veterans that are on this call or might listen to it in the future, firstly, thank you for your service to the United States people, but also you have your post 9/11 GI benefits that many of my students use, and we also have the Yellow Ribbon Rochester Pledge, which means we will fund you up to 100% of your tuition if you're at that 100% level. Your MBA, we have MBA and MS partnerships with Teach for America. We also have some partner school partnerships as well. I think we have 24, 25 schools across the United States that if you're an undergrad at one of those schools, you're allowed to get some minimum scholarship awards. And then for our MBA, our full-time MBA, we have some partnerships with the Forte Foundation, which is for women in business school and positions of leadership in the workplace. The Consortium for Graduate Student Study and Management, that is for U.S. citizens or permanent residents, allowing for an increase in underrepresented populations in business school and positions of leadership. And those underrepresented populations are Native American, African American, and Hispanic American or Latin. And then finally, we have a Reaching Out LGBT MBA fellowship, and that is awarded to 2 students per year. And all of those can be partial awards. Many of these are partnerships are not full awards, or they are not full awards. All right, so moving on to Simon specific scholarship decisions. The admissions committee makes these decisions. So we first make a decision on admission, and then we, if you said yes to be considered for scholarship, you would be offered scholarship after. The admissions committee does consider both your absolute and relative candidacy to the applicant pool. So we're looking at both, like, what program did you apply for? How do you measure with those other candidates for that program, those other admitted students? But then also, what individually do you bring to the table as well? What's unique about you? We make a quantitative assessment and a qualitative assessment. So that quantitative assessment will be your level and type of prior work experience. Of course, if you are a current undergrad and you don't have full-time experience, we understand that. And so we'll take into account part-time experiences as well as internships. Your GMAT, GRE score, if you're going to submit that. Because we do have a test waiver. You do not have to submit it, but we do encourage you to submit it if it's a good score, because it adds something else to your candidacy. And more about that will be discussed in some of our application tips webinars. And then we'll also consider your undergraduate major, your grades, the trending of your grades, your overall GPA as well. For our qualitative assessment, we have things that we think about: your leadership potential, your team skills, the different opportunities that you've had, both academically and in the workplace for being on teams, your interpersonal skills that we are observing either during emails with you, your video essay, your admissions interview if you're a full-time MBA candidate, your career focus, what do you want to do, as well as your overall kind of fit with our programs as well. You'll receive your scholarship award, as I've mentioned before, at the time of admission, and then that scholarship letter does have requirements within it on how to keep your scholarship for the second half of the program. The main thing to think of is that it's just we need a 3.0 cumulative GPA or higher to continue in the second half. A 3.0 GPA is required to graduate, so it's not anything kind of above and beyond that we require our students to keep their scholarship, just what you need to graduate. Okay, so the next steps to be considered for maximum scholarship is to submit your best application. And by best application, I mean if you're waiting on retaking a test, if you're waiting for new grades for your fall semester, if you're waiting on a promotion or something like that, or an internship to get on your resume, you might consider waiting to the next application deadline, or you don't even have to wait. You can submit in between deadlines. So you want to do that as soon as possible. We of course have our first deadline coming up on October 15th, but you can start your application at that website. You want to consider yes for scholarship consideration in the online application. That's all you have to do. Right now, you should be researching private or government funding sources. It's never too early to start, and you do not have to be admitted to do that. For my domestic students, the 25-26 FAFSA, it's set to open on December 1st. So we have a little bit of time for that. You're going to want to go to studentaid.gov for that application and more information. And then for my international students, as well as students that want to explore private loans, you can do that on elmselect.com. I mentioned our upcoming first deadline, I should say. Our upcoming deadline is October 15th. And then our next deadline is January 5th after that. And it's about a month and a half after going forward. If you are listening to this webinar live, an application will be added automatically to your account and within 1 to 2 business days. So please don't contact us before then if you don't see that application fee added. When you submit your application, you'll bypass the payment section completely, and your application will be submitted. It's as simple as that. Anyone that is listening to this webinar recorded, you will not get that fee waiver. You do need to listen to a webinar live in order to qualify for that fee waiver. And lastly, just stay in touch with us, connect with us, various disparate options there on our webpage. You go to programs, you pick your program, and then you just click on connect, and it'll share all the different ways to stay in touch. You can use that QR code to get to that webpage as well. And now it's time for questions. So we want you to ask the questions in the Q&A box. Any unanswered questions could be emailed me directly to stephanie.attridge at simon.rochester.edu. We will go through the pre-submitted questions, any personal or confidential questions that Trista sees that you're like giving out your GMAT score, your GRE. I know some people in the pre-submitted questions gave kind of their profile. This isn't the appropriate platform for that. So please do email and we'll get a response to you. So these are general questions that could kind of apply to most everyone, or at least people within your own program. All right, Trista.
Awesome. Perfect. Thanks, Steph. So a lot of these questions were answered by staff at some point during today's webinar. But we'll go ahead and this is a good one. Are there any specific scholarships for international students only? So is there a difference between scholarship opportunities here at Simon?
So for merit-based scholarship, plain merit-based scholarship, no. So that is just awarded based on the person's application and their candidacy for that particular program that they're applying for. And so those are general scholarships. I can say that we do have some named scholarships that are set up by donors of the school or friends of the Simon Business School. And sometimes those donors want their the money that they're giving for their scholarship to go towards specific criteria. And so we do have some named awards that are specifically for some international students. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, we're working on the Evan Lam Scholarship. He is looking for students from China for MS programs. And then we also have the Willett, the Joe and Janice Willett Scholarship that is specifically for Indians. And there's other scholarships as well. The donor can pick who they want or what kind of criteria they want. And then based on who enrolled, we select them for that. But at the time of admission, you're typically given general scholarship, and that is across the board for everybody.
Awesome. And I just want to remind everyone, as I see some more questions coming in, we will only be addressing questions specifically related to today's webinar. So anything related to funding your Simon degree, if you have more questions related to the application process, we will have plenty of webinars for those in the future. Is it necessary to submit a test score to be considered for scholarship?
That's a great question. The answer is no. Because we are test optional, we do not require a GMAT or a GRE in our application. And because we base scholarships on an application, we do not require a test score to be submitted for scholarship consideration. However, I will say that if you have a great test score, that is an extra kind of additional criteria within your application, not only to be considered for admission, but of course also to be considered for scholarship. And so if you have a great test score, then, you know, that's just something else that kind of boosts your candidacy, right? And can be another measure of success and something that the missions committee will look at when they're thinking about scholarship for you. So it doesn't hurt to submit a good test score, of course.
Awesome, thanks. And this is actually a question we had pre-submitted, and I also see it in the chat. Are international students eligible for graduate assistantships or to apply for graduate assistantships?
Great question. The answer is again, yes. Graduate assistantships are eligible for everyone because you're on campus, and all international students will typically be on an F1 student visa. We haven't had a J1 that is a Fulbright candidate, and some other partnerships kind of run through the State Department of the United States. But typically for our full-time program, international students are on an F1 visa. And they are eligible to work on campus. They can work on campus up to 20 hours during the academic year. During breaks and during summer, they can work 40 hours on campus. And then, of course, there's CPT rules and OPT rules that international students will need to follow. They will learn more information through webinars from the ISO, or the International Services Office, and also during their orientation programming once they enroll at Simon. And like how to make sure that they're following the rules for the F1 and working, but anything on campus that they get would be is eligible and would meet all the requirements. So, and international students, absolutely. We have a lot of international students that work both for the Simon Admissions Office, all throughout Simon. The Bennett Center hires students to be career peers. I think Advancement hires a couple students every year. And so it's a great opportunity, but a lot of our students, I think, get jobs even outside of Simon Business School. They could be teachers' assistants here at Simon. Some professors will hire them if they've taken their class. That's kind of the caveat, though. You have to take the class first, know the professor, and then they'll hire you to be a teaching assistant.
Yeah, absolutely. And you may have mentioned this earlier too, Steph, but I'll just reiterate, because I know different schools talk about graduate assistantships a little bit differently. And so Steph is talking about jobs that you would apply to here on campus once you're a student. So this is not something that you would be awarded at the time of admission or before you get here. This is a process that starts once you're here on campus, as a great option for additional spending money. So just wanted to reiterate that item because I know we get a lot of questions about that, again, because it looks different in different places. Another great question, do we offer any specific interest-free loan options?
I wish. I wish that you could borrow money for free. I think the only way to borrow money for free is typically from your parents or family members who are very generous. Yeah, there's no educational loans that I am aware of that are interest-free. That is typically how banks and different lenders are able to provide the money for that, because unfortunately not all students repay their loans, and so there is some risk there when they're lending out tens of thousands of dollars, and so the interest is how they make up for it. So there are no interest-free loans that I am aware of. I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
If any student hears of that, I would love to receive a link to it. I would say be very cautious if you are seeing that, because typically I kind of abide by, and I teach my daughter, if it's too good to be true, it usually is. And there's just, scholarships should be free because that is free money. Scholarships are money because a donor gave money to do it, or the school, like Simon Business School's merit-based scholarship, that's free money. You don't have to pay it back. That's fine. But loans, on the other hand, are typically there is interest for it. And right now, I know in the US, our interest rates are high. I think the Federal Reserve Bank of the US is actually today looking to reduce some of our interest rates, which will hopefully help us by the time you enroll next year in fall 2025 a little bit. We've just been trying to combat inflation right now. So interest rates are kind of high right now, especially even for educational loans, which are typically on the lower end for any kind of loan, like compared to like mortgages and auto loans and that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, great. And then we have a lot of questions in the chat about partial scholarships. What does that look like? The opportunity to receive a full tuition scholarship. And I know you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, but I think people may have joined a little bit late, Steph. So do you want to talk a little bit about, in terms of like setting expectations as you go into the admissions process, and sort of what that scholarship opportunity looks like?
Yeah. As an admissions professional, and also as a financial aid liaison, I would like nothing more than to give out free education to everyone who's qualified. Education is a wonderful thing, and I would love to give it for free to everyone. That is not realistic. And so I think while you're looking for, and that's not realistic, not just for Simon, but for a lot of schools here in the United States, top ranked schools, you have to go into the application process. Also, making the expectation that you will have to come up with funding for your education on your own through all of those ways that I have given in the presentation. And so it can be a combination of personal savings, family support, work, many of our students don't have spouses, so much less working spouses, so maybe that's not as realistic. But a combination of things in addition to loans and Simon scholarships and private scholarships. So it's not going to look the same for everyone, nor is it just going to be one thing for everyone. You need to kind of get and you need to do some research ahead of time, and that's why we spent some time on figuring out how much do schools cost realistically, what are their tuition, what are their fees, what are their living expenses, and then kind of how am I going to pay for this? How much do I have in my personal savings? Can my family help me? Now, I'm a first generation student. My family was not able to help me. I'm fully self-funded with loans. And so that may be what you have to do as well. You might have gotten a full award in undergrad. Maybe we have a lot of students that went to school undergrad for free, whether it be their country provides free education or they received funding because they were first generation or whatever, or it was based on financial need and they needed it. Graduate school is very different. And so you will need to come up with the funding. You will need to take out a loan. You will need to have savings to come to Rochester with so that you can have the first deposit for your apartment, your security deposit as well, so that you can buy groceries. You cannot realistically think that you can just come to the United States and come to Rochester and not put in any money and not borrow. You just can't. Okay. And if that is what you're thinking now, you kind of need to go back and reassess to see if this is what is a good idea for you, and then also do some research to find these other options. And maybe you have to delay for an extra year, but it's just not realistic to think that you're not going to be able to put any, or you're not going to be expected to come up with some money yourself with educational loans or savings.
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of piggyback on that, a question we had in the chat was, what does the Simon Business School merit-based scholarship cover? And so that is a tuition only scholarship. And so, even if you received a really competitive merit-based scholarship, that does cover tuition only, which of course is a significant portion of your investment, but that doesn't cover those indirect costs, your cost of living, everything that Steph has here on the screen. So do keep that in mind. There's lots that goes into your investment into business school outside of tuition as well.
Right, correct. Yes, the scholarship only applies to tuition. And so I have some international students that will look at the I-20 form or the cost of living and apply their scholarship to the whole thing. And I wish that was the case, but scholarship only is applied to your tuition, as Trista said. I'm a huge fan because I'm a product of educational loans. I'm a huge fan of educational loans and I will push those. The fact that allows you, it's a means to an end that allows you to get the goal and the degree that you want to then move on in your career. That is not something that should be taken lightly or be overlooked.
Absolutely. Back to graduate assistantships. And I think we talked a little, sort of mentioned around this earlier, but does a graduate assistantship offer some sort of a tuition waiver? Does that go towards your bill in any capacity?
Most graduate assistantships, I think I mentioned this, only will be like spending money. It'll be like a paycheck that you get that then gets direct deposited to your bank account, and it is spending money. There's a couple graduate assistantships that I can think of that students still have to apply for, as Trista mentioned. These aren't just awarded at the time of admission. These are things that you apply towards that I've heard that students get is a resident advisor, meaning you're an RA on a floor within an undergraduate dorm, or a building, a resident director of an entire building. that typically will give you free living expense, well, free housing, and then a stipend towards your money. It doesn't cover anything for tuition or fees, so that would be complete indirect expenses, nothing towards tuition. And then you get like a little bit of money too for as like a paycheck. And then I have seen some students be like assistant coaches for some of our athletic teams, and that also can go towards like it's a stipend. I don't think any money goes towards your tuition. It's all kind of just paid directly to your bank account as like a paycheck.
Yeah, absolutely. And so along the same lines of extra money, are the summer internships, and I am assuming this person is referring to perhaps the mandatory internship between your first and second year for the MBA program. Is that usually paid, or can they be paid?
That's a great question. Typically in business school, they are paid, yes, and they're paid at a very nice rate as well, typically at a full-time MBA salary. So like what you might be expecting after graduating with your MBA, you can expect to receive that. For most students, depends on industry, depends on the role that you get, but typically they are paid for our MBA students, and even sometimes, a lot of times for our MS students, they get, if you're doing the internship track, you could very well get an internship that's paid as well over that summer before your last class in the fall. So definitely something to keep in mind. A lot of my students do, kind of get through the first year and then taking out loans, and then maybe they reduce loans in the second year because they made some money over the summer. So that's absolutely realistic. Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And so a lot of the questions I'm seeing that are left are all pretty similar to each other that we've addressed already. I would say this is probably our final question. Again, along the lines of, okay, when I get my bill, how do I go about that? Flexible payment options, is that an option for me? If I do end up at Simon and I'm ready to pay my bill, do I have a little bit of flexibility in how I go about that?
I love that the student is thinking of this so far in advance. It's great. I do a webinar for my admitted and enrolling students in the spring so that they can prepare for this, but that's great. We do have what's called a payment plan options. And so absolutely. The bill is due typically the 10th of the month after you start classes. So if you start classes in pre-fall, which is July, first bill is due August 10th. And then if you start classes in fall A, which is August, bill would be due September 10th. But you can sign up for a payment plan option, and you would have 3 months to be able to pay off your bill. So if your bill is $30,000 US, the first bill would be due $10,000, and that would be due September 10th. The second 10,000 would be due October 10th, and then the third would be due November 10th. So they kind of weigh it out like that. So if somebody is paying kind of on their own, or their parents are helping them pay, it kind of divides it up so you're not paying the full sum all at once. Great question. All right. Well, I think that ends us. We went over a few minutes, so thank you for staying in touch with us and staying on with us for an extra 5 minutes. I hope I answered all your questions, and that you feel empowered to be ready to go and do some research on how you're going to be funding your graduate business school. It is realistic, absolutely, for you to use many different methods, and everybody can get a graduate business degree at a top-ranked institution in the U.S., but you do have to do some research ahead and expect to put some money in yourself or take out educational loans. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.